The return cycle. Why avoidants keep coming back to the strongest empath if they ran from love? Why do they keep circling back? To you. Because you weren't the weakness they feared. You were the mirror that revealed what they could be. And that is exactly why avoidants always return to the strongest empath. You expose the gap between the life they settle for and the life they secretly want. There's a pattern you've probably lived through without having a name for it. They pull away, disappear, claim they're not ready, but right when you finally start rebuilding, there they are again, testing the door they once slammed shut. And here's the truth, most people never understand. Avoidants don't return because they were ready. They return because you felt like home in a world where they don't feel safe anywhere. The strongest empath has a presence that calms their chaos. You listen in a way that makes them feel understood for the first time. You love in a way that feels almost unfair because they know they can't love you the same way back. And that combination is intoxicating and terrifying. Avoidants retreat when intimacy feels too real. Not because you demanded too much, but because you awakened parts of them they've spent their whole life trying to outrun. They leave to regain control. They come back to feel again what only you unlocked. But here's the catch. Every return isn't a compliment. It's a test of how much of yourself you were willing to lose to keep the connection alive. So this time, don't ask, why are they back? Ask, what version of me will they find when they arrive? Because the cycle only ends when the strongest empath realizes their superpower isn't absorbing someone else's emotional instability. It's deciding that their heart is not a revolving door. Avoidants are complicated creatures when it comes to love. At first glance, their behavior may feel inconsistent, even frustrating. They pull away, they close off, they create distance, and yet time and time again they return to the strongest empaths. This isn't coincidence, and it's not weakness on their part. It's about what empaths offer that no one else can. You see, empaths operate on a frequency of emotional depth that the avoidant can neither access nor replicate. To them, you are an oasis in a desert they didn't even know existed. When they run from intimacy, it's not because they don't feel, it's because they've never felt safe to fully experience it. And when they come back, it's because you make them feel seen, understood, and grounded in a way the rest of the world cannot. You offer emotional safety. It's not a casual thing, and it's not superficial. You listen when they speak, not just to respond, but to genuinely understand. You pick up on the nuances they themselves struggle to articulate. Every glance, every pause, every unspoken word, you catch it, honor it, and respond without judgment. For someone who habitually distances themselves from their emotions, this is revolutionary. They are not used to being met in their deepest corners. They are accustomed to being met with criticism, confusion, or frustration. You, however, provide calm and steady grounding. You don't panic at their distance. You don't chase them down with panic or plead for consistency. You simply exist in a way that validates their humanity, even in its complexity. And that presence becomes addictive because it is rare, almost impossible to find elsewhere. Avoidants often struggle with shame, insecurity, and fear of rejection. Their defenses are built over years, sometimes decades, of protecting themselves from vulnerability. To open up fully is terrifying, and to be fully seen can feel unbearable. Yet when they are with an empath, all of that defense begins to soften. There's no criticism, no judgment, no pressure to be perfect or to meet someone else's expectations. They can exist as they are, messy, contradictory, and incomplete, and still be accepted. That sense of unconditi, onal acceptance, is powerful, and it is what draws them back over and over again. Even if they left before, part of them knows that no one else will meet them with this combination of patience, empathy, and understanding. They know deep down that leaving may give them control temporarily, but the comfort and safety they experience with you are unparalleled. It's not just the absence of judgment that keeps them returning, it's the presence of emotional attunement. Empaths sense what is unspoken, the subtleties that others miss. You recognize their fears before they verbalize them. You feel their tension, their hesitation, and their quiet yearning. To the avoidant, this level of awareness is magnetic. It's as though someone finally sees all the layers they hide behind the walls they've built. In a world where they have learned that vulnerability is dangerous, the strongest empath becomes a safe space to explore it. They come back because no matter how far they run, no one else provides this rare combination of acceptance and understanding. Another critical aspect is that empaths do not react out of fear. The avoidant is constantly scanning for signs of control, judgment, or neediness. In typical relationships, any slight hint of emotional intensity can trigger their retreat. But with a strong empath, the dynamic is different. You respond with calmness rather than panic, curiosity rather than demand. You create an atmosphere where they can lower their guard without fearing emotional collapse. The avoidant senses this safety almost subconsciously, and that sense of security is irresistible. They may not consciously understand why they are drawn back, but their nervous system does. They return because you meet their unspoken need for reassurance, not through words, but through presence. Finally, empaths offer a mirror without manipulation. You reflect their best qualities, their potential, their capacity for growth. This is different from flattery or placation. It is genuine recognition. Avoidants are often disconnected from their own emotional truth, and seeing themselves through the lens of someone who truly understands can be transformative. They return not just for comfort, but for the clarity and reflection that only you can provide. You remind them of who they are beneath the layers of fear and avoidance. That reflection is magnetic because it allows them to face themselves without shame. In short, empaths provide something that feels rare, safe, and transformative. Avoidants return not because they are healed, not because they are ready, but because the strongest empath offers what no one else can: emotional safety, deep understanding, and a mirror of their true self. That is why the cycle continues, and why, despite the push and pull, they find their way back to you again and again. When someone is avoidant, it's easy to take their withdrawal personally, to think that you did something wrong or that your love was too much. But the truth is far more subtle and far more revealing. Their retreat is rarely about you. It's about what intimacy activates in them. The strongest empaths often feel this keenly. They notice the way avoidants pull away just when things feel most real, just when connection deepens, and just when vulnerability becomes unavoidable. And while it may feel like rejection, it's actually fear manifesting. Avoidants are triggered by closeness because it shines a light on the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. The very act of being truly known feels unsafe, and so their instinct is to step back. Is not a reflection of your worth or the value of your love. It's a reflection of the avoidant's internal architecture. They have learned, often unconsciously, that to show all of themselves is to risk losing control, to risk being hurt, to risk being exposed. The closer they come to genuine intimacy, the more exposed they feel, and the more urgent their instinct to retreat becomes. The strongest empaths notice this pattern, even before the avoidant does. You can feel the tension in the space between you, the hesitation in their voice, the subtle signs of discomfort that others might miss. You recognize that their withdrawal isn't a judgment on you, it's a self-protective mechanism. And that recognition alone changes the dynamic, because it allows you to respond with awareness rather than confusion or hurt. Avoidants leave not because your love overwhelms them in a toxic way, but because it awakens parts of themselves that they have been running from. Deep down, they feel the pull of vulnerability, connection, and emotional depth, but at the same time, these feelings terrify them. They are caught in a paradox. They crave closeness, yet they fear the exposure that comes with it. This is why even the most attentive, patient, and nurturing empaths can witness an avoidant pulling away just when everything seems aligned. The retreat is not a reflection of your failure. It is the avoidant responding to their internal alarm system. Understanding this distinction is crucial for empaths who want to maintain their own emotional clarity. This withdrawal often happens in subtle, almost imperceptible ways before it becomes obvious. They may stop texting as frequently, become emotionally distant, or avoid making future plans. These small acts are not punishments. They are defensive gestures designed to create space between themselves and the intensity of intimacy. And while it may feel like a rejection, It is more accurate to see it as a protective strategy. Avoidants are not used to handling the rawness of a deep emotional connection. They are accustomed to managing relationships with a degree of control and detachment, and when that balance is disrupted by the presence of an empath who sees them fully, they instinctively pull back. The strongest empaths sense this without needing explanation. You notice the slight tension in their body, the hesitation in their tone, the unspoken weight behind their words. You understand that what feels like distance is actually a plea for safety, an unspoken request to be met without pressure. And in recognizing this, you adjust not by chasing them or trying to fix them, but by holding space. You allow them to step back without judgment, creating a safe environment that paradoxically makes them more likely to return. This is a critical distinction. Empaths don't try to force the avoidant to face what they fear. They create a climate where the avoidant can safely face it at their own pace. What makes this dynamic so compelling is that empaths have the ability to mirror the avoidant's deepest truths without triggering shame or defensiveness. You reflect their capacity for vulnerability and their longing for connection in a way that feels non-threatening. You allow them to be both afraid and drawn in at the same time. This delicate balance is magnetic to avoidants because it is the first experience many of them have had of someone, witnessing them fully without trying to control or fix them. You hold the space for their fear while remaining grounded in your own emotional truth, which subtly teaches them that intimacy doesn't have to be dangerous. It is essential to understand that when avoidants withdraw, it is not a punishment or a reflection of inadequacy. It is a response to the intensity of genuine intimacy. The strongest empaths see this pattern clearly. They understand that their presence triggers fear, yet also creates a sense of safety that the avoidant cannot ignore. They recognize that withdrawal is part of the cycle, part of the dance between fear and longing that defines avoidant attachment. And this awareness allows the empath to respond with patience, discernment, and emotional integrity, rather than reacting out of hurt, confusion, or self-doubt. Ultimately, the avoidance withdrawal is a mirror of their internal struggle, not a reflection on the empath's worth. It is a signal that intimacy has reached a level that challenges their defenses, a test of how they navigate vulnerability, and a reflection of the tension between what they desire and what they fear. The strongest empaths understand this nuance intuitively. They recognize that the distance is temporary, that it is part of a larger cycle, and that the avoidance return is inevitable, not because they have been won over, but because the safety and understanding offered by the empath awakens a longing they cannot ignore. The return of an avoidant is never simple, and it is rarely about readiness. People often assume that if someone comes back, it must mean they've changed or are suddenly prepared to commit. But with avoidance, the story is far more complex. They return because they long for what only the strongest empath provides, not because they have suddenly conquered their fears or resolved their patterns. Their return is a reflection of desire and need, not of readiness. This is a subtle but critical distinction, and it explains why the cycle often repeats itself, frustrating empaths who hope that their patience or understanding will finally fix the avoidant or bring stability. Avoidants are wired to manage their vulnerability carefully, and often their longing is in direct conflict with their fear. They feel drawn back to the safety, understanding, and emotional clarity that an empath offers, but at the same time, the depth of intimacy they crave also terrifies them. They might leave to create space, to regain control, or to avoid the uncomfortable feeling of being fully known. Why? That very same connection continues to pull at them. It is this tension between fear and desire that explains why they return. Not because the situation is suddenly perfect, but because they are drawn to the rare emotional resonance you provide. The strongest empaths create a presence that resonates with their deepest unspoken needs, and that resonance is magnetic. The avoidance return often coincides with a moment of internal discomfort or longing. They may feel the absence of emotional safety and consistency more acutely than they realize. When they left, they were seeking relief from closeness, pressure, or the intensity of connection. But over time, the distance creates its own kind of ache. They miss the empathy, the understanding, and the non-judgmental attention that you gave so freely. They may not fully understand why they are drawn back, but there is a part of them, often subconscious, that recognizes the unique stability and emotional depth you provide. This is why avoidants often reappear when life outside of that safe emotional space feels chaotic, empty, or unsatisfying. You become a gravitational pull, not because they are suddenly ready for intimacy, but because they cannot ignore the feeling of being seen and understood by someone who truly gets them. It is important to note that the return is not a sign that they have resolved their patterns or are suddenly able to engage in a balanced reciprocal relationship. Avoidance may return impulsively, out of longing or curiosity, or as a way to regain a sense of emotional connection they have been missing. They may test boundaries, reconnect temporarily, or show affection without fully committing to the work of intimacy. Their actions are often inconsistent, because while desire draws them in, fear still drives their choices. They return to experience the emotional safety and understanding you provide, but that does not automatically mean they are prepared to sustain it or meet you where you need to be met. For the empath, understanding this is crucial. When an avoidant returns, it can be tempting to interpret their presence as a signal of growth or commitment. But the reality is more nuanced. Their return is motivated by longing and need, not necessarily readiness. This awareness allows the empath to approach the situation with clarity and discernment, rather than being swept up in hope or wishful thinking. You begin to see the difference between a return that is about filling an internal void and a return that is about genuine readiness to engage in a healthy, reciprocal connection. Recognizing this distinction prevents the empath from mistaking desire for transformation. The strongest empaths intuitively understand this subtlety. They recognize that avoidants are often caught in a push and pull dynamic, and that their return is part of the cycle rather than a permanent shift. They see the pattern clearly. The avoidant leaves to protect themselves. The distance creates longing, and then they return to seek what only the empath can provide. This pattern is not a reflection of the empath's inadequacy or of a lack of effort. It is the natural rhythm of avoidant attachment. The empath's role is not to force change or demand readiness, but to hold space with awareness, self-respect, and emotional clarity. By doing so, they honor themselves while recognizing the avoidant's return for what it truly is. Another key factor is that the empath offers a mirror to the avoidant's true self, a reflection of what they are capable of feeling and receiving. This is different from man. Manipulation or flattery, it is a genuine reflection of their potential for emotional connection and growth. When avoidants return, they are often unconsciously seeking that reflection, a reminder of the emotional depth and safety they experienced with the empath. They are drawn back not to fulfill obligations or make promises, but to reconnect with the part of themselves that only emerges in the presence of someone who understands them fully. This makes the empath's presence irresistible, even when the avoidant is not fully ready to engage in a healthy, sustained relationship. Ultimately, the return of an avoidant is a dance between longing and fear, desire and hesitation. They come back because the empath offers something no one else can, a safe, emotionally attuned, non-judgmental presence that meets their deepest needs. This return is driven by longing, not readiness, and understanding this allows the empath to navigate the situation with clarity and power. The avoidance patterns do not define the empath's worth, nor do they dictate the course of the relationship. They simply reveal the tension that exists when deep emotional resonance meets fear of vulnerability, one of the most fascinating dynamics in the cycle between avoidance and empaths is the way empaths often prioritize understanding over boundaries. The empath's instinct is to absorb, to nurture, and to seek clarity. to understand why the avoidant retreats, why they return, and why they behave in ways that feel inconsistent or confusing. This compassion is part of what makes empaths so magnetic, but it can also unintentionally fuel the very cycle that keeps them entangled. The avoidant does not just come back because of the safety the empath provides, they come back because the empath's patience and understanding allow them to return without consequence. Every time the empath bends over backward to accommodate their fear, forgive their distance, or explain away their absence, the avoidant learns that withdrawal is safe, that inconsistency has no cost, and that emotional intimacy can be entered and exited on their own terms. Empaths tend to approach relationships with an almost instinctive willingness to see the best in others. They try to interpret the avoidant's distance as a temporary reaction to stress, fear, or past wounds. This interpretive lens is valuable because it allows empaths to respond with compassion rather than judgment, but it also opens the door for the avoidant to test boundaries repeatedly. The avoidant senses the lack of pressure and feels reassured that they can withdraw without jeopardizing the connection. The empath's understanding, though well-intentioned, inadvertently removes the natural consequences that might otherwise encourage the avoidant to reflect on their patterns. In essence, the empath's capacity for empathy becomes a magnet that draws the avoidant back, but it also keeps the door revolving. Another aspect of this dynamic is that empaths often prioritize reconciliation over self-preservation. When the avoidant returns after leaving, the empath's first instinct is often to ask questions, to analyze the absence, to seek understanding. Why did you leave? What changed? Do you want to try again? These questions come from a place of care, a desire to create clarity and repair the relationship. Yet the avoidant is often ill-equipped to answer these questions with honesty or depth. Their return is not necessarily motivated by readiness or insight, but by longing and the subconscious pull of emotional resonance. When empaths focus primarily on understanding, they may inadvertently give the avoidant the impression that accountability is optional, that emotional growth is secondary to comfort, and that the connection can exist on their terms. This dynamic perpetuates the cycle, keeping the empath in a position of constant emotional labor, while the avoidant remains in a position of reactive engagement. Empaths also have an extraordinary ability to feel and process the avoidant's unspoken emotions. You can sense when they are anxious, fearful, or conflicted without them having to articulate a single word. This deep attunement allows you to respond with patience, reassurance, and non-judgmental presence, but it can also create an imbalance. The avoidant receives the benefits of emotional attunement without necessarily developing the capacity to reciprocate consistently. Every time you absorb their fear, soothe their withdrawal, or explain their behavior to yourself, the avoidant experiences the safety and understanding that draws them back. This pattern reinforces their behavior because they learn that returning is low risk and emotionally comfortable. In a sense, the empath's understanding becomes both the gift that keeps them coming and the mechanism that keeps the cycle in motion. The strongest empaths, however, recognize that understanding alone is not enough. Boundaries are not walls designed to punish or control. They are the frameworks that allow emotional safety to exist on mutually respectful terms. When an empath allows understanding to override boundaries, the avoidant can treat emotional presence as optional, leaving the empath vulnerable to repeated cycles of withdrawal and return. Setting boundaries does not mean withdrawing empathy, it means defining the terms under which emotional engagement is sustainable and healthy. The empath learns that their care has value and that it cannot be given indiscriminately without expecting reciprocal respect. This shift is subtle but profound because it changes the dynamic from a revolving door into a more intentional engagement. There is also a psychological aspect to this dynamic. Avoidants often fear abandonment and rejection, yet they also fear the intensity of connection. When empaths prioritize understanding over boundaries, they create a paradox. The avoidant feels both comforted and entitled to retreat whenever they choose. This paradox can make it difficult for the avoidant to develop self-regulation or to confront their fears directly. The empath's patience becomes a safe harbor for avoidance rather than a catalyst for change. By maintaining boundaries, the empath communicates that while emotional presence is available, it is not without conditions that honor their own well-being. This subtle but powerful message forces the avoidant to reckon with the reality of mutual responsibility in emotional connection, something they often resist but cannot ignore indefinitely. In essence, the cycle continues when empaths prioritize understanding without balance. Compassion is magnetic, but it is also a tool. Without boundaries, it becomes a lever that the avoidant can manipulate unconsciously. The strongest empaths learn that their superpower is not just in understanding, but in combining that understanding with clear, consistent boundaries that preserve their own emotional integrity. This balance allows them to engage with avoidance in a way that honors both their heart and their self-respect. It is this equilibrium that transforms the cycle from endless push and pull into a more conscious, empowered dynamic where emotional safety and responsibility coexist rather than perpetually collide. The ultimate power of the strongest empath lies not in absorbing someone else's emotional instability, but in choosing to protect their own heart. For years, empaths can become caught in the push and pull of avoidant attachment, believing that patience, understanding, and unconditional care will eventually transform the avoidant into someone capable of consistent love. They explain away absences, soften the edges of rejection, and convince themselves that their empathy is the glue holding the connection together. Yet the most profound shift occurs when the empath realizes that their worth is not defined by the avoidant's ability to stay or the cyclical intensity of their return. It is defined by their own capacity to honor themselves, to set boundaries, and to insist that love does not require surrendering their peace. Many empaths underestimate the power of this choice because it feels counterintuitive. After all, their natural instinct is to nurture, to bridge gaps, to provide emotional stability where none exists. Yet, paradoxically, the very act of maintaining their own boundaries, of refusing to endlessly chase or rescue, becomes the most magnetic force in the dynamic. Avoidants are drawn to the strongest empath not only because of their capacity for understanding, but because that strength signals emotional sovereignty. They sense that the empath's presence is no longer dependent on their approval or engagement, and this subtle shift forces the avoidant to confront their own patterns in a way they cannot ignore. When empaths protect themselves, they are no longer a revolving door. They are a force of clarity and self-respect that commands attention and introspection. This is why cycles can break or at least transform when the empath prioritizes themselves. When you stop defining your value by how the avoidant treats you, you reclaim emotional authority. You realize that their departures, returns, or inconsistencies do not diminish your worth. You learn that your compassion is not a license for manipulation or avoidance. In protecting your heart, you are not withdrawing love. You are creating a framework in which love can exist on healthy, mutually respectful terms. The avoidant, confronted with someone who will not tolerate emotional instability at the expense of their own well-being, experiences the pull of longing differently. It is no longer a passive invitation. It becomes an active choice to engage responsibly or to face the consequences of their avoidance. The empath's self-protection is not about revenge or control. It is about integrity. Every time an avoidant leaves and returns, the empath has an opportunity to assess the situation through the lens of self-respect. Do you allow them to sweep back in without accountability, or do you define the terms under which the connection can continue? This distinction is transformative because it removes the illusion that love alone is enough to sustain a relationship. It teaches the avoidant, often subtly and unconsciously, that consistency, respect, and emotional reciprocity are not optional, that intimacy comes with responsibility. The strongest empaths understand that their value does not reside in their ability to absorb pain, but in their ability to demand respect, honor their boundaries, and insist on emotional integrity. There is also a profound psychological impact on the avoidant when the empath refuses to sacrifice their own well-being for the sake of the cycle. Avoidants are accustomed to encountering people who tolerate their distance, excuse their behavior, or carry the emotional load for them. When an empath draws a line, it disrupts that pattern. The avoidant may experience discomfort, even fear, but it is a discomfort that is rooted in truth rather than manipulation. They are confronted with the reality that emotional safety is not automatic. It is earned, nurtured, and reciprocated. This is not about punishing the avoidant, but about teaching through presence, action, and consistency what healthy connection truly looks like. Choosing to protect your heart also transforms the empath's relationship with themselves. Over time, they internalize the understanding that their worth is intrinsic, not conditional. They are not defined by the avoidant cycles, their presence, or their absence. This internal clarity becomes the foundation for emotional freedom. When empaths no longer tether their self-esteem to someone else's inconsistent behavior, they experience a sense of power that is magnetic and grounding. They can engage with avoidance without losing themselves, without compromising their peace, and without falling into the trap of endless cycles. Ultimately, the empath's up. Our power is not in endlessly absorbing emotional chaos. It is in reclaiming sovereignty over their own heart. Every return, every withdrawal, and every test from the avoidant becomes less about proving love and more about practicing discernment, self-respect, and intentional presence. The cycle does not end because the avoidant changes overnight. It ends because the empath learns that their love is most powerful when it is not conditional on chaos, when it is anchored in clarity, and when it is delivered without sacrificing their own well-being. The strongest empaths know that the true victory is in maintaining emotional integrity, refusing to be a revolving door, and understanding that self-protection is not selfish. It is the most authentic expression of love possible. So, what does this all teach us? The cycle of return isn't about chasing someone else's patterns, nor is it about trying to fix what can't be fixed overnight. It's about understanding the profound power you carry as a strong empath. It's about recognizing that your love, your presence, and your understanding are gifts, and that those gifts deserve to be met with respect, care, and reciprocity. You are magnetic, no. Because you tolerate chaos, but because you know your worth and you honor it. You are a safe harbor, not a revolving door. And the moment you choose yourself over the pull of someone else's unresolved fears, you step into a power that no cycle can diminish. Carry this with you. Your compassion is your strength. Your boundaries are your armor, and your emotional integrity is your superpower. You don't need to bend, chase, or lose yourself to prove your value. The strongest empath knows that love is not survival. It is choice, clarity, and courage. And when you operate from that truth, even the most avoidant will see the depth of what they cannot take for granted. Thank you for being here today, for opening your heart, and for allowing yourself to witness the truth of emotional cycles in a new light. Thank you for trusting yourself enough to learn, to grow, and to honor your own power. Thank you for realizing that being a strong empath is not just about feeling deeply, but about living deeply, with wisdom, strength, and unwavering self-respect. And with that, I wish you courage in your journey, clarity in your choices, and peace in your heart. Thank you sincerely for sharing this time and energy with me. May you step forward stronger, wiser, and more aligned with the love and respect you truly deserve.